This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
So I've been following this case related to Cassidy Rainwater out of Dallas County, Missouri. And it's one of those cases where people kind of latched onto it. Not quite the same way they latched onto Gabby Petito, but they've latched onto it, and it's shown up in a lot of blogs and a lot of social media postings. Well, finally, the sheriff, he just fed up. And I was like looking for more information on the case, not because I ever really wanted to cover it, but then there was this social media post from the Dallas County Sheriff's Office. The sheriff there is Scott Rice, and the post simply said, addressing fake news. There's a lot of misinformation and rumors regarding the case of Cassidy Rainwater. He just lambasted the true crime community in this post, and I thought it was funny. There's a lot of misinformation and rumors regarding the Cassidy Rainwater case being circulated across social media and various news platforms. I understand the impatience and curiosity of the people. I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Listen to a crime reporter, blogger, or a TikTok videos that is sitting in their apartment or their mommy and daddy's basement eating great value cheese puffs and drinking box wine with grand intentions of being a social media superstar. If you're hanging on every word of this type of crap, believing it to be fact, you're living in a fantasy world. This isn't a TV series or a movie where we go to commercial break and have lab results in 15 minutes. Play within the rules of the American criminal justice system. While the system has its faults, it's still the best system in the world. We are judged by a jury of our peers with a judge presiding over the case, a prosecutor who presents the case, and a defense attorney who defends their client. This is where all the facts of the case come out, not TikTok, Facebook, or any other social media outlet. No, you're not entitled to a play-by-play of an ongoing investigation. If you want to be in the know, we are hiring along with every other law enforcement agency in the country. We are working in the real world. This is an active, ongoing investigation. When all members of the prosecution team believe that it is appropriate to release information, we will keep you informed. Until that time, I can tell you we have all parties involved with Cassidy Rainwater's case in jail. We expect additional charges to be filed in the coming days. If you're not a resident or planning a trip to our beautiful county to sightsee, remember a few things. While the citizens of Dallas County are friendly, neighborly, caring, and kind people, if you show up to trespass, litter, vandalize, harass, or destroy property, if that is your intention, you are not welcome here. We will prosecute you for this. Sheriff Rice. Listen, okay, so on the one hand, he's right. And that's the point. True crime is reaching a tipping point where it's going to explode. But there are some podcasts that are doing some good out there, and there are some social media that is helping in some ways. He's right to be angry, but the one thing I find hilarious is that he basically invites all these people to fill out a job application. So I went online to look at the job applications, and I'll get to that in another message in another time. But either way, Cassidy Rainwater's case, it does deserve a level of attention because she's a person, and her case deserves some closure, and she deserves justice. And that's my feeling about it.
I have like a bucket full of stuff down in Louisiana I've been doing, and we have some episodes after this one that we've already recorded. I wanted to go back for a minute because I ran into like all these like crazy interesting things that were related to my research on Clay. And that's Clay is a serial killer that calls into the Howard Stern show a really long time ago, 1997, August of 1997. People think that it's Russell Elwood. I have decided it is not. And not only that, I don't think Russell Elwood is actually a serial killer. I think he's just I think you described it as he was puffing himself up. So I'm pretty much, I think that's what he did. So you think?
I've actually come to the probably skewed opinion that I don't think he killed anybody.
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm at with him.
And it's not even an arguable point for me because, and I hate that. I hate feeling that way, but nobody cares. You know what I mean? Like as easily as it was for me to find that he was in jail when that phone call was made, I can't believe that that's a running theory on the internet. That he's Clay is my point, is what I'm getting at. Because it's like everybody just chalked it up to that. And I'm like, yeah, you didn't even look into it. Very quickly, it became obvious. I know you had mentioned in the last episode the possibility of a third-party call, but I think you were kind of playing devil's advocate there.
Yeah, I totally was.
Because, to an extent, if Russell Elwood had happened to made a call to anyone at the time of, the Clay called the Howard Stern show, I think that would have come up, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't. Not to mention, none of it adds up. But if you Google Clay, the serial killer, Howard Stern, something to that effect, it is penned as Russell Elwood. I actually have not seen anybody point out the fact that he was incarcerated at the time. Have you?
No, people don't look that deep into it. They just assume.
That's what the problem is.
Yeah, it's the assumption. So I've narrowed. Okay, you came up with a good candidate for him. I came up with two good candidates, and I'm backgrounding one of them right now because there's this weird thing that happens where for years this guy uses an alias, but I am relatively certain that I'm going through some civil cases related to him. I think I've figured out who Clay is. And I can't say his name at this time, but I'm putting a package together related to the Howard Stern phone call because I found a tier 3 sex offender who much later ends up on the sex offenders registry. Like it's years after the Howard Stern phone call, and he ends up on there for some interesting charges. And I am relatively certain. So he gets a couple of tattoos later, which threw me off. He seems to have at least one kid, maybe more. But I'm trying to get his voice. That's what I like. Before I turn any of this in, I want his voice. And I'm going to have to do something there to get it, because in my mind, he used an alias that was not Clay, but part of his full name is Clay. He's got a lot of DUIs. He's in the right area, New Orleans, Baton Rouge. In my opinion, this guy is probably the caller to Howard Stern. Whether he did everything he said he did or not, whether he's still doing it, I don't know. But he's at least somebody that should be looked at. You came up with another guy that the one that you mentioned most recently, you sent me a picture of. I have just started looking to him. I haven't ruled him out, but I have just started looking into him because I didn't.
I have absolutely nothing to go on except the name and where he was located and approximate age. I don't even know if that guy has a criminal record, or I don't know anything about him. So just FYI.
Yeah, no, this has been an interesting
and obviously hole. I'm not going to say anything about anybody that hasn't earned it. No. But it's been sort of like a free-for-all, because this is an endless possibilities situation. And so some of the hints that we can go off of from what we've learned from sort of listening, discussing, researching the whole Clay situation was my impression that Clay wouldn't have had any sort of major dealings with law enforcement, at least up until 1997, right?
Yeah, the guy that I am so convinced of doesn't have any major dealings till 2002.
Okay, and then so a couple of kids, not married, at least by 1997. That doesn't mean he never got married. Let's see, what else is of interest.
Well, this guy worked in a kitchen during a flood.
He did, and he beat a nutria rat to death, and he felt.
I don't know about that. I just know this guy. My suspect worked in a kitchen during the flood.
I see. Oh well, I'm not.
You're talking about Clay, the hints that Clay, the caller, gave. Sorry.
Right. No, I'm just trying to sort of surmise what we know about Clay, which is not a lot. And a lot of it's, I think I have inferred it because, again, how many things, point away from Russell Elwood.
Oh, all of it. Like once you start looking at it, Russell Elwood points away. He doesn't even know that he's like, I'm dreaming now. Somebody came to get me. Tell me I was a serial killer.
Russell Elwood is a very sad case. And I actually came to a conclusion that I think that one of her companions that testified in Russell Elwood's trial, I think that her friend probably has a good idea of what happened. And I can't tell you, and I wish I could remember the name. I can't remember the name. But she testified about she was with the victim, and the victim left, and they were going to meet right back up. And she said that the victim was crossing the highway, and she heard a car honking at her. And that was the last time she saw her, basically. And I was like, oh, so she was the last person with her, right? Because I felt like the story that was being told, to her recollection, it may have been true. I just felt like Russell Elwood more than likely wasn't picking her up. And it seems like maybe there was information that I found that contradicted that he could have been picking her up. But now I can't remember. But anyway, I felt like the person who was giving that testimony more than likely knew what had happened to her. And I can't even explain why I think that.
You're talking about Denise Sanders.
Is that who it is?
Yeah, she was the first. So Denise Sanders, Antoinette Holmes, and Guinevere Henry, they all testified.
Denise Sanders is the one, yeah.
Yeah, they all testified about encounters seeing Russell Elwood.
But Denise Sanders was testifying about her friend being with him. The other two women were giving accounts of their own experience with him.
Right.
And so Denise Sanders saying what she said, I felt like the confidence that it would have taken to have given that story, factoring in the possibility of, putting an innocent man in prison or letting somebody who actually did it go free. Not to mention the fact that the victim herself, there was no signs of trauma to her body.
When she was found in the water? Absolutely. There was
no signs of trauma. And so that it doesn't fit with a murder, because essentially what is said is she had some cocaine in her system, and that upon examination, there was no signs of strangulation. There was no gunshot wounds. There was no substantial stab wounds. There was no signs of blunt force trauma. There was nothing on her body indicating that anything had happened to her. And it was said that she was alive
but unconscious when she hit the water.
And that her cause of death was asphyxiation by drowning.
Correct.
Okay, so she wasn't, her cause of, it wasn't even homicide.
The name of the episode that I put out for that was Making Cases from Negative Spaces, based on something you said.
But yeah, because, okay, so the inference, let's just say, the inferences I make are the same things as what a negative space is, basically. If you think of it from, the artistic point of view, like as far as you've got the actual piece done in whatever medium, and then you've got the surrounding area, the areas that aren't used, how it's put, right? That's the negative space, how it's presented,
right.
And, the opposite parts of it. in this case, and I think it should be in every case, not only do you have to listen to what's being said, you have to think about what's not being said, the way it's not being said, or whatever's relevant, right? And so that is the negative space. But to me, as I was listening to your, monotone voice reading, I thought, why the heck were they even having this trial at all?
You don't like my monotone voice?
There's nothing wrong with it.
I do it because it's easier for people to follow.
Well,
and take a nap.
That was actually my point. The reason that I was able to absorb what you were saying was because we weren't talking, you were reading something. And as I was listening to it, I absorbed it. And it was because of the monotony that I absorbed it, as opposed to I wasn't thinking about it, I was hearing it.
Yeah, it's not emotional at all. When I go through and pull court documents that I feel like are important to an investigation, I have to do the same thing for myself. Like I have to do you ever use screen readers? I'll sometimes
I do.
Yeah.
All the time.
So I'll let the screen reader read it to me, and that's how I can absorb something while doing something different.
And it is. And that voice, typically, depending on what you have the settings at, like that is a very monotonous voice. And so to have it be, so I wasn't being offensive. I was, when I was listening to your monotone voice reading, it actually helped me because I didn't read the same thing that you presented in the episode. I didn't read that. I think I might have reviewed it quickly, but listening to it and I'm putting things together in my head and I'm thinking to myself, so basically this guy got convicted for murdering someone who drowned.
Yeah.
And there wasn't even any indication that anybody held her under the water or anything.
Right.
Okay, so she was more than likely high and fell in the water.
I mean, they say they've got a statement of him saying no, we don't have this. They say they have this. That he took a woman who was high and dumped her. But they're saying that she didn't even have that much of the drug in her system. So she may have gotten high and fallen in. She may have just fallen in and drowned.
It's my opinion that Russell Elwood more than likely didn't have contact with this woman ever, the victim. And if he did, it was on a very casual basis. I don't think she was ever in his vehicle. I don't think he ever would have even had the chance to give her a push into the water.
I think if there was anything legitimate other than these eyewitness statements connecting Russell Elwood to what happened to her, we would have heard about it in trial.
Well, really quick, I'm going to let you segue because I know this case, this whole situation, it really bothers me because you've got Russell Elwood, who's believed to be Clay. He's not Clay. It's ridiculous that anybody would think he was Clay. And then you've got him being so he's in Angola, possibly working hard labor. I don't even know if that's a thing anymore. But for life, he's never, ever going to get out. And he was convicted of murdering a woman who drowned.
Yeah. And the hard labor is a designation as to where you're going to go. It's not like a literal thing as much anymore. I mean, there is hard labor involved, but it's not.
This was resolved, 22 years ago? I don't know how long it's been.
A long time ago.
Okay. And so he's just been in jail all that time.
Yeah, believe it or not, some people, that's their thing. Like, they want to go there, so they tell the stories to get there. That's where some types of false confessions come from. I don't think it's the case here. I think he just was, he was a solution to a problem. He was a Band-Aid.
Do you have any idea what his IQ was?
Oh, his IQ was low.
Okay.
Yeah, his IQ is, he's probably operating at a low norm.
Well, he refers to one of another thing I learned from your monotone voice. He refers to one of the law enforcement officers involved as an associate advisor And that was bothersome to me because the document you were reading was an opinion from the Court of Appeals of Louisiana. And so this was an official, I don't know if it was published or not. I don't know how they operate in Louisiana, but it was an official ruling. I found it really bothersome. A lot of the information that is sort of regurgitated by the recount of the story from the Court of Appeals, they don't take any issue whatsoever with his associate advisor, which I don't even know what that is, being this law enforcement officer who, as the story goes, the associate advisor came in to help kind of glean information off of his quote friend, end quote. So he was assisting another law enforcement agency in getting information out of him. And I imagine what the reason that Elwood brought this guy in was because he thought it was going to help his situation. And it ended up that it was used against him. And the court even talks about how he hung up the phone and he was out of control for a couple of minutes after he talked to him, and things weren't happening the way he thought they should. But the court just glosses right over that.
Not only that, they gloss right over the fact that he even states that the only reason he's talking about anything is so he can go back to New Orleans. He's stating that outright. And if you follow the timeline and the geographic line of this, it makes no sense. And
is there anything this case makes me realize there's not a whole lot of hope.
For Russell or for anybody?
For anybody. This is clear. So the Court of Appeals, so from you reading their opinion, and honestly, I've been doing some renovation work, so I listen to our shows in my AirPods, and sometimes they kind of go on and on and on. So I need to know what has been in the show, what hasn't been in the show, what I need to say again to get back so it gets into the show eventually. And we've been jumping around and, trying to, and so I was, listening to sort of it. To me, it's work, right? It's part of my job as, doing the show. As I listened, I realized was it the highest court in Louisiana or just the middle one? Or do they have a middle one? I'm not sure.
So this was the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal in Louisiana.
Okay. It's an appeals court, so they're ruling on, what another court has already done.
Right.
And the things that they're saying are very clearly, they are basically stating all the information that I kind of gathered from the situation, which include, a guy randomly being at a place at one point in time, somebody randomly passing that information along to another law enforcement officer, them sort of super copping him into talking about situations, putting all these pieces together, and ultimately he's convicted of murdering a woman who drowned. The court never says, well, it would be ridiculous for this man to have been convicted of murder because she drowned. The court says, that the medical examiner said that she drowned, and that because she wasn't that great in this area, they called in an expert. And the expert said that she was alive until she hit the water. At that point, she would have died from asphyxiation. She would have died from asphyxiation by drowning.
Yeah, but you and I both know that once you get to the appellate court level, before you get to a Supreme Court, they don't make decisions based on they sometimes.
I'm not
technically make a decision.
Okay, and I get that, and I'm not saying the court should have done anything different, right? What I'm saying is, knowing nothing about this case and just listening to you read parts of the opinion that were relevant to that week's show, the information that I got from the situation was an appeals court stating directly that the man, was convicted of murdering a woman who drowned. Should anybody ever be convicted of murdering a woman that drowns?
Sometimes people are helped. I am
But
with
that's
you.
not what he was. Okay, but so if people are helped, which again they specifically say that there was nothing on her body indicating any sort of trauma. Nothing. No gunshots, no stabs, no slices, no blunt force trauma indicating even like an impact from falling or whatever. Okay?
But she had been in there for a significant amount of time.
Right, but it was February.
Correct.
And so it wasn't a case where we're talking about like the hot summer Louisiana day that,
Right.
deteriorates all the evidence. The conclusion, it didn't say that there wasn't enough to make a determination. She was thoroughly examined and it was determined that she didn't have any of those types of injuries. The only reason I know that is because I was listening to you read the court's opinion. Okay, the court's opinion, as it's restated from the information on record of this case, it basically is saying they are affirming a guilty conviction for a man who has been convicted of murdering a woman who drowned. And because I keep saying that over and over again and nothing's changing, I think that we should segue now.
So you have to imagine yourself in the shoes of a defendant for a second to understand what's driving Meg a little nuts about the Russell Elwood case. And that's this. You're in court, and frequently the injury in this case, or manner or mechanism of death, is drowning. Frequently that injury, manner of death, it's an accident. That's largely where drowning falls. It takes a particular type of ruling to make that be ruled by a coroner homicide. So they have to look at it and go, okay, this person drowned, and then because of these other factors, it's a homicide. In this case, they didn't do that. They looked at it and they went, she drowned, her injuries were drowning, that's her, manner of death. The cause of death is undetermined. So we've put a man on trial for an undetermined reason, basically. Like, if you're just doing it semantically. But it's not ruled to be a homicide in other means. It's pretty literally that they don't know what happened to her except that she drowned. The drowning was an injury that took her life, and nothing points to anything outside of that. And this guy's never getting out of jail because that happened. And here's where that gets to be important. It's because we've put a man on trial for his life. And basically, there is circumstantial evidence that sort of lends to the fact that he was not a great person. But when you get to the point that you're saying, okay, well, he committed a homicide by putting a woman in the water and she drowned, that's a tricky situation. And it's not just that I would do that for Russell Elwood. I look at it that way for anyone. And you don't want to be in that situation where a prosecution is not being paid attention to. Because, that's part of the system. The system is supposed to work a particular way. And in this case, it does not. It doesn't give justice to any victims. It doesn't give justice to defendants. And it doesn't give justice to prosecutors to try cases like this. How can I say that? Like, how can that be an opinion that I have? That's a totally valid question that's probably going to pop into people's heads. They had already recognized that the other case was very similar to this, and they dropped the charges because the prosecution looked at it and went, that doesn't make any sense. So why didn't they look at this and go, that also doesn't make any sense? And there's nothing on the record in this case. And it's a fairly voluminous case when you look at the volumes and volumes of paperwork that they have collected here. They also don't have any evidence in this one. They felt like they had more here because they had a lot of interesting witness statements placing the white guy with black people in a neighborhood where they didn't think he should be. So they prosecute him. And then he has all sorts of questionable statements because, quite frankly, he has no comprehension of what's happening to him. But at the end of the day, if you drop the other charges, then why didn't you also drop these charges? Because they're the same thing.
Well, there's not a lot for me to change there. I will say that Saul Gothard was on the paperwork there. He was a longtime Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals judge in Louisiana. He was a judge for 33 years. He passed away during the pandemic last year on July 5th down in Metairie. He had become a social worker. When he grew up, he decided, I want to be a social worker. So in 1957, he had gotten a master's degree in social work, and he moved to New Orleans. He established a practice there being a counselor. This is the guy who was the judge hearing that. He was the lead on that case. He successfully ran in 1972 for a juvenile court judgeship. So what he did in between those two times, between 1957 and 1972, he worked as a social worker, but he went to Loyola University Law School at night. His mentor was an Orleans Parish juvenile court judge named Leo Blessing, and under his mentorship, Gothard became a juvenile court judge. And he basically went to law school so that he could be a judge and look at children's issues. He was very into juvenile issues. In 1986, he left the juvenile judgeship and he successfully ran for a seat on the state Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal because Jefferson Parish, where he was, had 3 juvenile court judges. Anyways, long story short, this guy was not focused on this type of case. He was the one who did the write-up here. He
sounds like he's well qualified, though, right? I mean,
he's generally well qualified.
So if somebody that's well qualified could make a statement like what I've said repeatedly, what does that tell you?
Well, here's what it tells you. In areas like this, what I've run into is you have no good guys. And they make something out of nothing. And I wanted to use... So while I was researching Clay, I was looking for things that were in the news and the media in the time around the Howard Stern phone call. That's one of the other things is this suspect, his birthday is a week after the Howard Stern phone call. And I was like, I bet his birthday coming up is what made him do this. But I came across some items from the news that year when I was hunting. And one of those is a very long trial. It's one of the longest trials that I've ever followed as far as the paperwork goes. And it's in this area where Saul Gothard would have been at the time. It's not a juvenile issue, though, and it is a guy named Clay. It has nothing to do with our particular Clay, but this episode is about the trial of Clay Shaw. On November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and only one person has ever been prosecuted for his assassination. No matter what you do, it's a fascinating conspiracy case that people 58 years ago now? The last 58 years, it has captured people's attention. One of the issues with cases like this is not with the judges, it's not with the expert witnesses, it's not even with the defense team, and it's not even with the police. It's with bad prosecutors. There have been a number of prosecutors over the years that you can't tell if they're good or bad. You have to sort of make a judgment call. I have had multiple run-ins with different types of attorneys in Louisiana, and I frequently have difficulty understanding who is who as far as good guys versus bad guys go. And I found that the answer is generally that you just can't tell. The origins of this particular story, we have 4 or 5 articles on this, but primarily you could go on Wikipedia and probably read a close version of what I'm going to tell you because it's that complicated. On March 1st of 1967, the New Orleans district attorney at the time was a man named Jim Garrison. And Jim Garrison decided to make an arrest and to charge New Orleans businessman Clay Shaw with conspiring to assassinate President John F. Kennedy with the help of Lee Harvey Oswald, a man named David Ferry, and others involved in the conspiracy. And this was brought to trial. When Clay, the serial killer, made the phone call to Howard Stern, it had just been the 30-year anniversary of this arrest and these things happening. In 1997, that's the 30-year anniversary. There's a lot of interesting players here. Clay Shaw was a playwright He was a pioneer of restoring the French Quarter. He was a director of the ITM International Trademark in New Orleans, and he was, by all accounts, he was a successful businessman. He grew up in Kentwood, Louisiana, and he was the son of Glarus Lenora Shaw and Glarus's wife, Alice Shaw. Glarus Shaw was a United States Marshal, and Grandpa Shaw had been a sheriff down in Louisiana. When Clay was 5, his family moved over to New Orleans, and he eventually attended Warren East End High School. During World War II, Clay served as an officer in the U.S. Army, and he was a secretary to the general staff, and he served in Europe. He was decorated with multiple awards by 3 separate countries. The United States honored him with the Legion of Merit and awarded him the Bronze Star. France had given him a French military decoration that honored people who fought with them on the Allied forces. And he was also given a Merit Award, a Merit with Membership Award by the President of the French Republic. And in Belgium, they named him a Knight of the Order of the Crown of Belgium. He was honorably discharged in 1946, and he helped to start the international trade market in New Orleans after the war. He's a published playwright, not just a guy who was writing different things. He was actually published for it. And in March of 1967, he was arrested and thought to be a part of the plot to assassinate JFK. So the origins of this case can be traced back to an argument between New Orleans residents Guy Bannister, who's one of our other players, and Jack Martin. And the way that this ties in is through a man named David Ferry and a man named Perry Russo. On the day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Guy Bannister pistol whipped Jack Martin during an argument. There's different accounts as to what the argument was over, but generally speaking, the Warren Commission heard different types of testimony related to either phone bills or missing files. Over the next several days, Jack Martin told authorities and reporters that Bannister had been in the company of a man named David Ferry, who Jack said and believed might have been involved in the assassination of JFK. Martin told the New Orleans police that Ferry knew Lee Harvey Oswald, and it went back to a time when they all served together in the New Orleans Civil Air Patrol, and that Ferry was supposed to have been Oswald's getaway pilot in Texas. Martin said that Ferry had driven to Dallas the night before the assassination, a trip which Ferry explained was a research for a possible business venture, where they had been looking at the idea of opening an ice skating rink in New Orleans. Some of this information ends up getting into the hands of New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. Now, Jim Garrison believed at various points that the JFK assassination was either anti-Castro Cuban exiles, a homosexual thrill killing, perpetrated by ultra-right-wing activists, or in the least conspiratorial, had been the work of a conspiracy by the Central Intelligence Agency and their staff and personnel. Jim Garrison, in February of 1967, said that they had solved the case of JFK's assassination. On February 22nd of 1967, less than a week after the newspaper story broke that Garrison had solved the case, David Ferry, who was his chief suspect, was found dead in his apartment from a brain aneurysm. If you go back a little ways, you'll find that right when Garrison kicked off his Kennedy assassination, he actually had Guy Bannister at the top of his list. But Guy Bannister had died of a heart attack in 1964. So Garrison went back in the following 2 years, and in 1966, he re-interviewed Martin. And Jack Martin told the district attorney that Bannister and his associates were involved in stealing weapons and ammunition from armories and in gun running. Garrison believed that the men were part of an arms smuggling ring that supplied anti-Castro Cubans with weapons. For those of you who have not followed what Castro means to Cuba, if you look in the 60s, that'll make a little more sense to you. With Bannister being dead, Martin being a state's witness, Garrison starts to believe that Shaw, Bannister, and Ferry had conspired to set up Oswald as like the patsy for JFK's assassination. He said that the motive for the assassination, in his mind, would be anger over Kennedy's foreign policy and efforts to find a political rather than a military solution in both Cuba and Southeast Asia. And also, it was related to Kennedy's approach to, at the time, the Soviet Union. But basically, with all of these people essentially dead and Martin being a state's witness, Garrison focused on a man named Clay Shaw and charged him with being a part of the conspiracy in John F. Kennedy's assassination. In the Warren Commission report, there's a man mentioned named Clay Bertrand. There's an attorney in New Orleans named Dean Andrews who testified to the Warren Commission that while he was hospitalized with pneumonia, he received a call from Clay Bertrand the day after the assassination asking him to fly to Dallas to represent Oswald. According to FBI reports, Andrews told them that this phone call from Clay Bertrand was a figment of his imagination while he was sick. But he testified that the reason he told the FBI this was because of harassment by the FBI and the U.S. government. Garrison says that after a long search of the New Orleans French Quarter, and this is mentioned in his book, which is called On the Trail of Assassins, his staff was informed by the bartender at the Tavern Cosmos that Clay Bertrand was the alias that Clay Shaw had used. According to Garrison, the bartender felt it was not a big secret, and they began encountering one person after another in the French Quarter who confirmed that it seemed to be common knowledge that Clay Bertrand was the name that Clay Shaw went by. There's a memo from Jim Garrison's investigator, Lou Ivan, to Garrison on February 25th, 1967 that states he could not locate a Clay Bertrand despite numerous inquiries and using multiple contacts. And in December of 1967, Garrison appeared on a Dallas television program. He claimed that a photograph taken in Dealey Plaza immediately after the assassination depicted a federal agent in plain clothes picking up and walking away with a .45 caliber bullet. He said that the bullet was not entered into the evidence for the Warren Commission and was proof that another gunman was involved in the assassination. So this is all happening 4 years after Kennedy's assassination. The photograph also showed Dallas Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters looking on with a uniformed Dallas policeman. Walters stated the following week that the photograph was taken approximately 10 minutes after the assassination. The finding was nothing significant. He said that it appeared to be blood on the grass or possibly a piece of skull. And Buddy added, if it had been a bullet, it would have been significant. So Garrison takes his evidence to a New Orleans grand jury, and Shaw ends up indicted on a charge that he conspired with Ferry, Oswald, and others named in charge to murder Kennedy. A 3-judge panel uphold the indictment, and they order Shaw to a jury trial. Shaw basically ends up in the crosshairs of Jim Garrison, and he stays there for 2 full years until February 6, 1969, when Jim Garrison reads his opening statement to the jury on count that Garrison is going to prove that Kennedy was shot from multiple locations. Oswald conspired with Clay Shaw as early as June of 1963, and that they all had traveled to Clinton, Louisiana, where they were observed by a witness, and then that Oswald transported the gun identified by the Warren Commission as the murder weapon to the Texas School book depository, and that gun was part of the assassination, that the shot that killed Kennedy came from a different direction, and that Oswald escaped in a station wagon driven by another man, and then that Shaw had received mail under the name Clay Bertrand. So that's what's going on here. That's the gist of what Jim Garrison is going to prove against Clay Shaw, and that's what he says is his involvement. Have you ever followed the Kennedy case?
I know a little bit about it. Could you sort of, in a sentence, you just said, so that's how Clay Shaw's involved in it. Could you, in a sentence, tell me, what his involvement was?
What Garrison said in his opening statement was that he had solved the Kennedy case, and that John Kennedy, the president, was shot from multiple locations, and that Oswald began conspiring with Shaw as early as June of 1963. Shaw, Oswald, and David Ferry traveled to Clinton, Louisiana, where they were observed by a witness, and that Oswald transported the gun identified by the Warren Commission as the assassination weapon. This is the gun that he was taking to the Texas School Depository. And that when he escaped after the assassination, where a shot came from a different direction, he was driven away in a station wagon by another man. And then he finishes it with, Shaw received mail under the name Clay Bertrand. So the idea was that Clay Bertrand was the man looking for the attorney to represent Oswald in Dallas.
Right. Well, okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Garrison believes that Shaw is Bertrand. The way this goes at trial is the prosecution is trying to enter into evidence a fingerprint card containing Clay Shaw's signature and admission to using the alias Clay Bertrand. In regard to this, Judge Edward Haggerty, who's overseeing all this, after dismissing the jury, he conducts a day-long hearing. When he gets done, he rules that the fingerprint card is inadmissible. He said that 2 policemen had violated Shaw's constitutional rights by not permitting the defendant to have his lawyer present during this fingerprinting. Judge Haggerty also announced that one of the officers had violated both Miranda and Escobedo, which are major rulings related to arrest procedures. People know what Miranda rights are now. I don't know if as many people would know what Escobedo is, but Escobedo is the holding by the United States Supreme Court in 1964 that criminal suspects have a right to counsel during police interrogations under the Sixth Amendment. So the way they violated it was they did not inform Clay Shaw they had the right to remain silent. So they violated the Miranda and they violated Escobedo by not letting him know he could have counsel and by not letting him know he could remain silent. The judge said that the officer had violated Shaw's rights by allegedly questioning him about an alias and then adding, even if he did ask the question about an alias, it's not admissible. So if the officer is telling the truth, which I seriously doubt, this is the judge's quote. And then he just finished with the statement, I do not believe the officer. So the key witness against Clay Shaw is a guy named Perry Russo. Perry Russo testifies that he had attended a party at the apartment of anti-Castro activist David Ferry. And at the party, Russo said that Oswald, David Ferry, and Clem Bertrand, we've now changed from Clay to Clem, had discussed killing Kennedy. The conversation.
Is that a different person?
It's apparently not a real person. They're
but
saying
it's not even referring to the same person, or
I mean,
what?
In the courtment, Russo identifies him as Clay Shaw, but he calls him Clem Bertrand, which is a new name.
I think is the thing I think is kind of throwing me off here is he's there's a case being made that isn't actually making a case, and I think that's where I'm continuously getting lost.
It's nonsense. But my point is, This all originates with a district attorney in New Orleans. Okay, it's not a federal judge. It's not a federal case. It's not anything that makes any sense. It's not at the scene of the crime in Dallas. It's not in Texas. Okay, but what this is a prosecutor that has taken a case and made something out of nothing. You guys can go people can go and read about this online in detail.
It is unbelievable.
Let me tell you what happened, though. So he presents all these witnesses, all this stuff. The trial takes a while. The time from arrest to trial is years. It all starts in February of 1967, and it all wraps up on March 1st, 1969. Do you want to guess without, I don't know if you read it or not, but do you want to guess what happens after the prosecution and the defense present their cases?
Well, I would imagine the jury laughed.
The jury took 54 minutes to find Clay Shaw not guilty.
Well, and so, okay, that is one of the things that we could put a tally mark on, the system worked.
The system worked, yeah.
Okay, but the question is the system really set up to be like this? So, from everything you said, like, there was never a case to begin with. I can't even imagine why the judge seemed to be very forthcoming in his findings about the inadmissibility of the fingerprint card, which essentially, I just want to point out, you said Escobedo, which was the right to counsel, and then Miranda, which is the right to remain silent. And the key is the information that is providing your potential suspect with that information. People don't necessarily know, but all you really have to do is not be a bully. Like, all those things come down to law enforcement not being bullies.
Ultimately, yes.
Because it seems to me like the reason there's 2 violations would have led to the inadmissibility of the fingerprint signature evidence that was the subject in that matter was because they forced him to do it. Right? That's what's happening there. And that's why the judge threw it out. So it seems like the judges got a little bit of, insight happening because he didn't let it in. Right? He said, no, you violated 2 major things and you can't have this evidence come in. Without that evidence, which I'm not exactly sure what that proves anyway. I don't even know what that evidence would have proven. That's the thing that really kind of throws me off there is even if it went in and it was established that he was, he went by that name or whatever they were trying to do there. I don't know what that proves exactly. It's entirely possible that, the judge ruling the fingerprint evidence as inadmissible based on constitutional rights violations, that's excellent. I'm so glad he did it. Defense attorney, I don't know if it was raised, but how about a motion to dismiss for lack of probable cause? I don't see the case being made.
Well, so several attorneys and authors got involved after the fact here. A guy named Mark Lane, he actually interviewed the jurors in this case. And he's a pretty well-known American attorney who is also one of the leading conspiracy theorists on Kennedy, which is why that's one of the reasons this case is so fascinating to me.
Do you think that lacking the role Kennedy played in this situation, that this would have ever happened at all?
No, no, and that's the other. There's been it's
People
weird.
Just jumping on this,
it's very similar to what's happening with Gabby Petito. Where suddenly Dog the Bounty Hunter is hunting Brian Laundrie, and all these podcasters are talking about her, and she's everywhere, and all these people are coming out and saying it's domestic violence. They understand it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. As far as did these things happen to people or not? It's attaching themselves to, like you said, the shooting star or the lightning in the bottle. And
that's what's happening here, though, right?
Garrison would not have gotten as far as he did. He would not have gotten as far as he did with Clay Shaw. But the takeaway from the jurors was insane. Basically, the jurors, depending on the account you read, the takeaway was that there really was a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, but that Shaw wasn't necessarily linked to it and hadn't been proven. There are multiple accounts of this where, on the one hand, Lane is lying. That's the attorney who interviewed the jury. There's another author and playwright that got involved named James Kirkwood. He was the one who said, no, this is a lie. But he wrote the book, which is the play side of A Chorus Line. So he's very well known, and he was a personal friend of Clay Shaw. I'm bringing all of this up in this grandiose way to point out some things. It's odd that it ties back into Clay the serial killer on Howard Stern, but here's how I look at it. These jurors had no idea what they were getting themselves into, and somehow, because of Clay Shaw's defense team, even though Garrison was really heavy-handed with all of this, they took it to be that Clay was innocent or it hadn't been proven. Take your pick on like what they decide there. Later findings on this and the CIA talking about this, you can read a bunch of like undisclosed documents about this now where the gist of it is Shaw had nothing to do with this. And all the money in the world up against the government was enough for him to be basically found not guilty. But Shaw was never innocent. And Shaw's life was wrecked by this. So when I talk about people like Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas and Russell Elwood, all right, what does the flip side of that look like? What is the real segue here? Around the time that call was made, in the late summer of 1997, a number of documents began to be released. And by late September, they had all been released that relate to this trial. And there were press releases that had come up. From a September 21st, 1997 article in the Buffalo News. This is by Patricia Wilson is the author. This is just an article you can find online if you want to go looking for it. The only man ever tried in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy lived a Kafkaesque horror before his acquittal in 1969, according to documents released this week. Clay Shaw, the New Orleans businessman accused of conspiracy to murder Kennedy, in his personal papers describes the nightmarish experience of being charged with the most heinous crime of the century. Shaw, who died in 1974, was charged as part of the Kennedy assassination investigation conducted by the late New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. The papers were kept by a friend of Shaw until earlier this year when he donated the materials to the Assassination Records Review Board, an independent federal agency overseeing the identification and release of records related to the November 22, 1963 shooting of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. The collection includes Shaw's diary, chronicling life after being arrested for conspiring to kill the president, records from his criminal case, correspondence, business documents, and photographs. The diary opens March 1st of 1967 with the words, "And so it begins, this journal, which is to be a record of the most horrifying, unbelievable, nightmarish experience through which I've ever lived. For it was on March the 1st that I was arrested for conspiring with others to murder the president, John F. Kennedy. Even as I look at the words now, it seems absolutely unbelievable that such a thing could come about," Shaw wrote. "But it has, and it's important that I try to set down for myself and possibly others the Kafkaesque nightmare which began on this date." He said he never met Lee Harvey Oswald, Kennedy's accused assassin, and one of the men with whom Shaw allegedly conspired. Oswald was shot and killed 2 days after Kennedy's assassination by Dallas nightclub owner Jack Ruby. Shaw's diary describes his amazement as a 3-panel judge bound him over for trial after incredible testimony about an overheard conversation he allegedly had with Oswald at a party he never attended, and the extreme improbability of another witness's story about a clandestine lakefront meeting at which he was supposed to have given Oswald a roll of money before departing in a big black limousine. Shaw was finally acquitted on March 1st, 1969. He was ruined financially and filed a civil lawsuit charging Garrison with violating his civil rights. But he died of lung cancer in 1974 before the civil suit could come to trial. They ruined this man. They ruin people's lives all the time. When you get a bad prosecutor, there's nothing you can do about them except get them out of power and move on. And the thing about it's so hard with this case to talk about it because Jim Garrison is up until that point considered to be something of a golden boy. He's had some issues through the years, but you have to really go back and look at him to realize how jacked up he was.
Do you think he was just trying to, because, the beginning of that article says the only man ever prosecuted. Do you think that he was just trying to make a mark?
Yeah, and he was trying to make a mark the only way he knew how. He goes on trial later. He acts as his own defense attorney. There's several crazy things that happen where in the 70s, Garrison is really he sort of shows his true colors. The truth is he's just a human. But realistically, the the reason that we never find people like Clay and we only find people like Russell Elwood is because of people like Jim Garrison. Because Jim Garrison is trying to leave a mark. He's going for the easy case. He's not the one who prosecutes Russell Elwood. Russell Elwood has a different prosecutor. But my point is, if it can happen in 1967 that someone is arrested and tried in 1969 for being a part of a conspiracy to kill JFK, and realistically, the real patsy in this situation is Clay Shaw. They're really just wanting to, like you said, make a mark. They're wanting to have their say somehow related to what went on to the president being assassinated. I can't tell if they were really trying to make a mark by having the only conviction related to the Kennedy assassination, or if it was just like a big, huge piece of public grandstanding to get the conspiracy out there and to have it be accepted by the mainstream public. But either way, it's terrible.
Do you think so let's say that it is just to get the conspiracy out there for the mainstream public to be aware of it. Do you think that they go, hey, we're going to plant this conspiracy? Or do you think that they thought they were telling the truth?
It's hard to say.
I would like to think that this guy is literally in fantasy land and he genuinely believes the tale that he's woven here.
One of the things that has been said to me in comments, people trying to be polite, not always being polite, about what we do as podcasters, you and I specifically, but podcasters in general, is you're all over the place. The reason I'm all over the place is because there's not a narrative for the cases that I cover that makes sense. If you choose a narrative, you're doing what Jim Garrison did. And you are probably correct. Like, in fact, one of your comments has been, are we crazy for like covering this way and looking at it from this angle and like putting this conclusion out there? And I would say to you, I don't think we're crazier than Jim Garrison indicting Clay Shaw for conspiring and ruining his life.
But that's a really low bar, dude.
I mean, like he was a district attorney. I'm just saying, like
no, that's why, because it's so obviously skewed now, like from our perspective now, it's like, wow, what was that guy thinking? Like, because even in the write-up about the trial of Clay Shaw, like they can't even make like what the case was even going to be. There is no link here except, I mean, you could say, well, the district attorney said so. And, you know, from what you just read, it appears that like 3 judges held an indictment or however they did it at that point in time for him to be arrested for it, right?
Yeah.
And so did those 3 judges rely on the prosecutor's word for something, right? How did that...
without this prosecutor, this case never gets made. There's a lot of resources that went into this. If you look at, like, first of all, okay, between you and I, Jim Garrison is delusional.
Okay, right. Okay.
That's just me saying it to you. And here's how I know that. He's saying that the FBI, the CIA, the U.S. government, and the Warren Commission didn't understand what was happening. But between the fall of 1966, when he really started investigating and putting resources into the Kennedy investigation, by February, he had solved it. Do you believe that? Just that on its face.
No.
Okay, this guy, he frequently...
I still don't think he solved it.
No, he didn't solve it. But he ends up, like, in... Garrison earlier in his career ended up in this position with all these local judges. He gets convicted, by the way, in 1963. But the conviction gets overturned.
What was he convicted of?
So he gets... Okay, the way it went down is... He gets into this like battle with these local judges where he is hardcore against prostitution and all of the things that like Bourbon Street is known for. When he gets into this battle, it's because judges really feel like what's going on with his office and the police that are arresting and sending cases to his office is sort of crazy.
Like he was on the take?
No, it doesn't start that way.
Okay.
It starts like he doesn't know what he's doing.
Okay.
And they're looking at it and like, so if you take today's plea bargain to save the system from being overloaded and put it back then, the judges were literally just looking at stuff and going, that's not evidence. And that is evidence, but it's not evidence of what he says it is evidence of. So a lot of his cases were getting kicked out. There were a series of vice raids that were done in the French Quarter, and he was getting a lot of headlines in 1962, 1963. He got into a conflict over his budget with some local criminal judges because they were cutting certain resources from the vice raids. And he accused them of racketeering and conspiring against them. So those 8 judges said, we just need to explain to you what you are, Mr. Prosecutor. And this is 8 counts of misdemeanor criminal defamation. So at the time, criminal defamation was saying something that wasn't true, which he was convicted of by a different judge who knew all these judges. And in 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court, they overturned his conviction and they threw out the state statute related to misdemeanor criminal defamation as unconstitutional. At the same time, Garrison ended up indicting Judge Bernard, I can't remember if it was Koch or Coke, but Cockke. He indicted him with criminal malfeasance and then proceeded to prosecute him twice. Judge Bernard was acquitted. Then he switched roles later, and he would charge policemen with brutality, and those charges would be dropped. He accused the state parole board of accepting bribes, but he never indicted anyone. He frequently would get into trouble with state legislator, and he would be critical and tell them they didn't know what they were doing. They would tell him he didn't know what he was doing. They ended up unanimously censuring him for maligning the members in 1967. In 1965, he had run for re-election against a judge there, and he won with 60% of the vote. But the thing is, I don't think people realize how that works, because a lot of people don't come out to vote for the prosecutors. And also, he was an intimidating dude. He was 6'6", 6'7" tall. He was a big dude. But the end result of all of this is he's also delusional.
He absolutely is delusional.
Yeah. And he's not the only one. He's not even one I've ever run into. He died in 1992, which is long before any of my dealings with Louisiana or New Orleans or any of those places down there. And I come from this is something we talked about over the years, but I come from the perspective of, look, I don't have to be right at first. If I'm wrong and I start seeing evidence that I'm wrong, I'm going to evaluate it very carefully. And I'm going to admit that I'm wrong. My involvement with Louisiana came from thinking I knew something about a case that no one else was seeing. And no one told me I was wrong. They were like, investigate it yourself. I was right in one regard and wrong in another, but I admitted it. And everything that needed to happen with the system happened. But afterwards, I couldn't help but realize how many years had been wasted. And not just me, the dollars and resources that the state and other people had put into it was insane. The case has a Supreme Court ruling now. It involves a famous exoneration case that I felt like was wrong. A different district attorney, and there are 4 of these cases, so I'm not giving away anything here, but a different district attorney had taken, actually, I'm wrong, 5 cases. There are 5 other cases like it. They were repeatedly trying African-American men for murder, where when you looked at the case didn't make sense. And sometimes they were right, sometimes they were wrong. But the bottom line was they just were wasting resources, because most of them who were innocent just never committed another crime. But the ones who were guilty, they would just commit another crime and they could try them on that. And I watched it all unfold, but basically from the mid 80s until almost the year 2000, what went on in the courts in Louisiana is frequently indiscernible at trial, and the prosecutors are almost always to blame for it.
I'm not sure exactly how or why or whatever. It happens everywhere. It just so happens we've got some really good examples in Louisiana. And that's my position on it. And we sort of fell into, man, sometimes I get so far down like the rabbit hole or whatever that I can't remember how I got there. But I know that there's a lot of stuff happening in Louisiana. And I do know that there's another case there that we're going to talk about. And the main reason that came up to us was because of our research into keys, because some of that criteria, it would fit as far as the victims were concerned. Like it had to be something that we said, no, he didn't do that. Right.
Yes.
And so that's why like that's sort of relevant in my thinking, but then it becomes its whole other thing. And then it just so happens that Clay comes up. And because Clay comes up, it delves even further back into similar things. And so we've just kind of stumbled upon what I consider to be really good examples of sort of the injustice. And then in this case, I mean, there's a good story to be made here on how like the system works. Now, Clay Shaw, I'm not sure if he said this or not, but so he's the only man to have ever been taken to trial over the assassination of President Kennedy, and he was acquitted of the charges against him. But he was the director of the International Trade Mart. Okay. And so that's what he did for a living. And so he was a businessman, and I assume he was pretty successful. And so if you take a situation like this is an infamous situation. Is this the only conspiracy theory? Is this how all that started? About Kennedy?
This is the one counterpoint in the conspiracy theories about Kennedy that sort of engulfs all of the conspiracy theories.
Well, that's what it sort of seems like to me. I don't get too far down conspiracy theory roads because the thought that our government can operate just in the day-to-day task that it needs to versus like them pulling something off. It's just unbelievable to me. So you've got the director of the International Trade Mart, which is I assume private business, but it's a title that indicates some success, being charged in Kennedy's assassination in a crazy, unrelated way, it seems. And then, so 30 years later, you've got Russell Elwood charged and convicted of murdering a woman who drowned.
Right.
All right. And so he goes to jail for the rest of his life. So what are we looking at here? You've got Russell Elwood, who is he's a cab driver who often lived in his cab, and he had substance abuse issues, and he had problems, right? He had gone to jail multiple times for different charges. It does not give a history of Clay Shaw's criminal background, but it doesn't seem like he probably had much of one.
I didn't find anything other than
this.
Right,
and this kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's like a huge blip. I mean, it ruined his life, basically, which, as it would anybody's life, right? So the only difference really here is Clay Shaw didn't go to jail for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and, one of the most interesting...
But he died.
He did. He died. And he died
5 years later,
young.
Yeah.
Clay Shaw came out as a major from the United States Army. So a major is a huge, huge rank. Like, to get there, like, it's a really big deal. It is the rank above captain, just below lieutenant colonel. So it's I guess an 04. But he's a person who, it's not that he's above reproach.
Right.
It's that the only thing that really, the way this all ties back to him with the whole Garrison investigation is eventually in 1980, I think, I may be wrong on my years, there was a very, very brief point in time where the domestic contact service of the CIA had used Clay Shaw because of his rank in the Army as a major, and they had sort of tested him out for intelligence work. And there were a lot of people doing different non-clandestine activities for, the CIA at that point in time was barely 20 years old. So it's speculated that that's sort of where Garrison went off the rails, is someone gave him information he wasn't supposed to have and said that, Clay Shaw did some work through his business work for the Central Intelligence Agency. And that's what sparked the insanity of it all.
Well, and every single thing I have in the back of my mind about over the years, what I've heard about conspiracies about John F. Kennedy's assassination, I can hear the origins of those in this story.
Yeah, this is absolutely where it all begins, and
it's nothing. That's the thing. It's nothing. That's what's so crazy to me.
Yeah, the amount of headspace and media space that the Kennedy assassination conspiracies occupy and have occupied for many years now is insane to me. It's not that. So, as I've said before, and I think I believe that a lot of conspiracies, if you tear them apart, you'll find a couple of true threads early in the conspiracy, things that sort of, they may not make the conspiracy true, but they're the truth that sort of sparked people believing the conspiracy, because they look at it and they go, well, that was true, that one fact, so maybe the second fact is true. And it sort of spirals from there depending on how much steam it gains. So it's not that any one of these things are true. It's just that Garrison, in a criminal trial against a former major from the U.S. Army who is a successful business guy, he has somehow managed to talk about homosexual thrill killings and anti-Castro Cuban killings, and somehow the CIA is involved. And whether any of those things are true, fine, choose your path. They can't all be true. It can't be both a lone gunman and the CIA is involved. It can't, all of these things that people talk about, the end result is going to be very boring.
Right. It was literally just a guy was pissed and killed the president. That's what happened.
So Clay Shaw's being caught in the crosshairs of Jim Garrison, and this is how I will wrap up my view of this episode. That happened because Jim Garrison wanted to be the superest of super cops. And I understand he's a prosecutor, but still he falls on the side of law enforcement. He wanted to be the guy who got the guys who killed Kennedy. That's the end result of how all of this starts. It doesn't matter what's true and what isn't true. That is why we know it today, is because Jim Garrison was convinced he was going to solve this thing. This was going to be his thing he solved. His legacy.
So in saying that, which I agree with you, but do you think that he didn't care if it was true or not, or that he believed it to be true?
The problem I run into in answering that question is he floated too many, so he worked the case like a private detective would, which I think a presidential assassination is a little above the pay grade of an average private detective, even a good private detective. With the different theories that he floated, because they kept coming out at trial, which by the time Clay Shaw's trial is happening, it's 5.5, almost 6 years after Kennedy's been assassinated. So Clay Shaw's trial is in 1969. The anti-Cuban part, like, there are elements of it I would believe individually, and there's some elements I would believe together. The problem is I can't believe all of them because they don't work together. They don't make sense. There's too many pieces to be coordinated there that it's just not possible to do.
And this may go a little too far off, but how many presidents have been assassinated?
4 United States presidents have been assassinated.
Okay.
Attempts were made on the lives of 2 other presidents, 1 president-elect, and 1 ex-president.
You've got Abraham Lincoln, James A. Garfield, William McKinley, and JFK. So he was John F. Kennedy was the last president to be assassinated. And that was in 1963. Theodore Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan. They had assassination attempts on their lives. It's my opinion that, and I would have to look a little closer, but I think it just takes a crazy enough guy, and I say guy because it is a guy. It has been a guy in these situations. I think it just takes a guy who's just had enough whatever to, grow a pair and go shoot the president. I don't know that there's that much more to it. And so for that, because I have that sort of mindset about assassinations and assassination attempts, I find all of those theories directly for the reasoning behind why the president would be killed like that they just don't get there for me, because it doesn't really accomplish anything with regard to the theories.
I have no idea what happened to JFK personally. I don't.
He got shot by somebody who was mad about something.
Yeah. But I'm saying
I would say no matter what that statement's true.
I don't believe we have any real motive though that we know.
It's just somebody who's had it and I'm going to go kill the president. And if they were to be emotionally aware of what's going on, they're not even mad at the president. They just don't realize it.
I've even heard different accounts about Oswald being killed. That, I think I would believe was a conspiracy. I believe that someone might have seized the opportunity of Oswald being in custody and having him killed. I would believe something related to Oswald was more conspiratorial than I believe.
See, and to me, it's perfectly natural that somebody that was accused of killing a president that, that was beloved by the country, that somebody would in turn around and kill him. It's just guys getting mad. They don't even know what to do with themselves. I mean, that's just my opinion, obviously. The way that all played out, and, this gets way out of our purview because, it is a presidential assassination and that is political no matter how you spin it. But JFK was in a parade waving at people.
Yep.
And then he was no longer. And I wonder, did he even know what happened?
Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabbratiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabbratiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
I'm sinking into